It's been quite a while since we've done an update video on our living wall system, so I thought I would take a walk down to the road and take a look at this really dense vegetated system that keeps us visually protected from the road. But of course, as you can hear from the cars whipping by, we still hear the cars. So bear with me when you periodically hear a loud car. But let's take a zoomed out look at what the living wall is up to. So right now I'm standing across the road looking at our property, quote unquote, looking at the place we live in Stewart. And you can just get a little glimpse of our roof in the back there. This is the living wall in its peak glory moment of the season. And there's even a high tunnel just on the other side of that pile of crazy vegetation. Our whole wacky chicken composting system lives just on the other side of this, and we are now at a moment, what is this, maybe 5 years in, where this time of year truly cannot see into that at all. Just bear with me, there'll be a car here for a second, which our chickens could not see at all, and the car could not see them. So it's really working. And the beautiful part, I think, of a system like this is that each year it just gets more and more dense, more and more live. In fact, I think there's a little group of rabbits that may live somewhere in there, because periodically I'll walk to look at things here and there's just rabbits running around right next to the road, but it's sheltered enough that they're enjoying life in there. What's interesting is that very early on, at least on this side of the driveway, the east side of the driveway, the major element that provided the visual barrier was giant miscanthus grass, Miscanthus ex giganteus. They are still 100% there. In fact, you can see the pattern of them mixed in between, but there's so much other diversity of shrub and tree form now that they're a little bit dwarfed. They're a little bit set into the background. There's still a backbone component, but a lot of the heavy lifting of the visual barrier is being provided by other elements now. And that was part of the goal, is to have enough diversity that there could be some death, there could be some senescence, or some elements that are replaced or filled out over time. And so, for example, you can see in here, miscanthus is still doing its thing really nicely, but now poplar is starting to really be involved. In fact, some of the poplars, these were just cuttings that were put in, have popped up as they do. Their namesake is true. There's one in the chicken yard, here's one here, easily around 20 feet or more. They will need to be coppiced at ground level or pollarded over winter in order to have their regrowth be a little bit more useful, a little bit more where we'd like it to be. We don't necessarily want every layer to escape into being a huge tree layer. So there's some management bits that need to start happening in a real way. But there's that miscanthus very happily still existing. I think if we'd never pruned the poplars or the willows or the other tree elements, there'd start to be enough shade that the miscanthus would disappear. I'm really super pleased with the role that the elder is playing, the elderberry. That's this shrub here, another shrub here, and on the other side there are quite a few. They are so vegetatively dense at pretty much the most perfect level for all of this. We really want the most visual barrier to happen roughly between 4 and 8 feet, and that seems to be where the elder has most of their body. They put on a beautiful nectar flow for bees earlier in the season, and now you can see they are ripening up fruit. And this space has become wild enough and dense enough, we barely ever get in there. I'll try to for this video, but we leave all of the fruit that forms. They're a little ways off from maturing, but all of this is for the birds who live in here. I think there's a couple of nests probably in this space. And to that same end, we've got Helianthus giganteus, or giant perennial sunflower. They flower much, much later in the season, so they'll offer a nectar flow for bees and wild insects in another month or two, and then a microscopic but incredibly useful sunflower seed that goldfinches and other small birds can enjoy as a calorie and fat crop in the fall. It's been at least a month or two since I even tried to get inside, so to speak, of this. Bear with me, I'll give it a shot. But you can see some sunchokes here. They keep moving around, the voles move them and they move themselves. And it's now, I think this was where a pathway used to be. There's enough dew on things, I probably can't really even get in there without getting soaking wet. But what I'm getting at is the interior or inside one of the layers of this. In the fall and the winter, I can walk through and prune back miscanthus, do some pruning and other work on the grapes and the hops. But for the summer, it's basically, for a large mammal, it's not really accessible. We have no concerns now of deer coming in to eat anything in here. It's just impenetrable unless you are a bird or a small enough chipmunk or rabbit to get underneath it all. But the elements are managed once or twice a year during the dormant season. And for example, the English walnut, so some of the canopy elements that we're hoping to see pop up and be here for the long run, some plums, some oaks that are in here are now above the canopy of everyone else. And that's really all I'm looking for, is to see that long-term succession is possible. And we'll do management on the poplar and the willows and the other fast-growing trees to chop them down a bit. Looking at the west side of the driveway, it's a similar picture. There are some fast tree elements that are really taking off that more likely than not would benefit the system to be managed a bit more often. The poplar for sure, which we basically fully anticipated, they need to be cut a little bit more frequently to make room for other plants and also to keep their canopy lower where it's more useful. The willows through here, the curly willow, I think some sort of pressure or disease, I talked about this in the past, affected a few of them. There were more willows in here that died, but because we put in these elderberries, the red bud, there's a plum, it filled back out with diversity. So again, as per always with these sorts of videos, if you're thinking about a system like this, bear with me on the cars, don't think about a single tree repeated over and over and over again. Maybe there's a tree with a shrub, with a vine, with an herbaceous layer, with some other shrubs and things like that mixed through. And this way, if a few die, there's still a lot in there. And we're seeing redbud in particular seems to be doing incredibly well in here. So maybe we'll cut some more of these willows back and promote the redbud as a more reliable element. It's pretty sweet. The road crew that comes through and does pruning or mowing all the time, we asked them to leave this as a wild corridor in the past. We forgot to put a sign up this year, but I think they remembered, and I was fully expecting all of this to be mowed down, but they left it. And I understand if they do, I'm not gonna be upset if they were to come through and actually mow this, because for safety purposes and it's what people want, whatever. But it's really sweet when the folks that do the mowing recognize what we ascribe as valuable. And you can see we've got some thimbleberries in here. There are some fuki growing throughout, and then coltsfoot was wild and growing, and so we've been working around them. That's this nice ground cover. So hoping to see a lot more diversity in the shade-loving, moisture-loving herbaceous layer that is to the north of this wall, in between the road and where the wall begins. We'll take a look on the south side in a moment, where we have precocious hazel, or it's an English and American hybrid hazel that's growing. But what is very sweet to my eye to see, and it really speaks to the idea of this becoming an ecosystem, an ecotone that's evolving. This is a little seedling hazelnut, almost 100% certainly planted by a squirrel last fall and sprouting up. So it's one of those moments where I start to really see that a system that we're setting in motion is starting to catch and really lock into the landscape, when other wild creatures begin to decide that, ooh, let's add some fruiting bushes in here. Let's add some more nut tree elements. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing oaks and chestnut and hickory and any other seeds that are robbed, quote unquote, but actually just picked up and moved by wild creatures. We'll start seeing more and more trees in here. And we may intervene, but probably we'll just let them grow. I'll wrap this video up shortly here. I just thought I'd show you the inside, or our side, so to speak, of this. So now we start transitioning into a little bit more curated space that we interact with quite a bit. So there's a little mini walkway. In the summer, our walkways get completely shrouded by plants. This is Senna hebecarpa, just about ready to flower. We push our way through that, and a redbud, and some more senna. And now we can see, so the high tunnel, which from the road you cannot see anymore. And since the living wall is to the north of this high tunnel, all the light that the tunnel needs is fully coming in. and all the protection it needs is coming from the north. So it works out really well to have this little slice of light aperture that comes through, and otherwise it's really shrouded. And all of those tall plants that we're looking at with the big beautiful leaves, they look a bit like redbud. These are all the cultivar hazelnut, and they're loaded with hundreds and hundreds of almond-sized nuts. So hopefully the chipmunks leave a handful for us to collect for seed to grow out for the nursery. It's incredibly luscious crop that they're setting up this year. And they're getting tall enough now that I think, again, next winter we'll go through and coppice and pollard, or cut back to stimulate regrowth so that it puts more of the visual barrier between us and the line of sight of cars, and maybe we can use it as an opportunity to stool layer them as well. Anyway, that's our living wall in the middle of summer, a few years in a cool climate. We're zone 5B, central New York, so we get long, strong, cold winters, and this still functions quite nicely. Again, the theme of really high density, really high diversity in both plant types, plant families, in structure, all of these different relationships, having some nitrogen fixers in the mix, having some very tall trees, some very small shade-loving herbaceous layers. All of that mixes together to create something that is pretty darn resilient and pretty malleable. So we could truly lose about half of the plants that are in here and still have some good visual barrier, and things will fill in very quickly. So if you're thinking about protecting the view from the road, or creating some privacy between yourselves and a neighbor, creating corridors for wildlife and habitat. In fact, I would strongly suggest that this is probably filtering air that's coming off of diesel trucks on its way into our property. This is a nearly $0 investment, just photocopying plants from our landscape by seed, by cutting, by divisions. Very, very doable. And of course, malleable and adjustable over time. You don't have to get it right. Certain parts can fail and you can add in where there's gaps. But I strongly encourage you to think about adding more structural diversity and privacy between you and the road if you live on a busy road like us. And we do.